Hi, I'm Tijuana with T Quilts, and today I want to show you how to make this pinwheel block, which is called Windmill. And I used my studio and my gold die cutters to cut this block, and I'm going to show you how. So I start with my chisel block, which is an AccuQuilt gold die, and then I've marked my space so that I know where the die blades are, and then I've even marked that if I want right sides up on my fabric and if I want reverse blocks, I need to cut it with right sides of fabric facing down. Also, I know that I need a piece of fabric about 11 by 4 inches to cut this die, and I have that marked up here. So for my project, I need to have all of my fabrics right side up. So what I do here is I make sure that I have scraps of fabric, and I need, for this block, I need to have 4 of each shape. So I need all of my fabrics right side up. So I just lay my fabric down and cover the blade. And then I keep adding pieces, and on the gold die, I can layer up to 6 layers of fabric. Just because I'm cutting with the studio that takes 10 layers on their die, I still have to adhere to the gold die requirements and only cut 6 layers at a time. Again, I'm placing them all right sides up because if I put some face down, I'll have a reverse chisel. Now, because I'm using the gold die on the studio, I do need to have the gold die adapter. So I lift this up, put the gold die adapter in the tray, put my go on top, and I just want to check one more time to make sure that all of my fabrics are covering the die because I have plenty of room here. So then I take a cover, plastic sheet cover for the studio, not the go, and put it on top. And then I just push up a little bit to get the handle engaged. And then I just push my tray, give it a little push, and it starts to roll through. Now normally I would just leave my tray over here and take my pieces off, but I'm just going to pull this back so I can show you what I have. So I always slide my plastic off so that my pieces don't pull off with the cutting plastic. And then I take my pieces out of the center. And then the rest of this goes in my scrap bag, but I can see already I have quite a bit here, so I'll keep those. I'll trim these off and use these in my string quilts later. And I'll just set these aside. And then now I have my chisel units for my block, which we'll be sewing later. So I'm going to set those aside. Now again, this is the block that we are making. In order for me to have the other piece that I need another die. And I've determined that a 3.5 inch half square triangle die works perfectly here. So I'm going to use my 3.5 inch die, except that I don't have a 3.5 inch die for the go. What I have is the bountiful basket dies, and on that die is a blade that will cut 3 half square triangles, but I'm only going to concentrate on this area here. And the reason why I'm using that die over the studio die is because on my studio die, I can only cut 1 half square triangle at a time, and even at 10 layers, I'm only cutting 10. On the go, if I use these 2 areas and I can cut 6 fabric layers at a time, and I have 2 die blades I can use, then I can cut 12 at a time. So I'm going to use the gold. I'll cut that off. Okay. So when I layer this fabric on the gold die, remembering that I can only cut 6 layers at a time, I make sure that my selvage edge is covering the blade. And then I fan fold my fabric back to make sure that I'm past the blade and put a little fold there. Very lightly, be careful because the blade is under there. Then I fan fold back to the selvage. So that's 3 layers. Here's 4 layers.
Shane, hi, it's Mom. Listen, I need you to call me back. I just got a letter from the court saying you're due to appear on the 13th, but they're going to revoke your bail.
This is now 5, and I can fold it back one more time for 6. Now, if I don't cut this, whatever's up under the fabric, these blades will go ahead and cut, and I don't want that to happen, so I'll use my scissors and cut this fabric off. Just place it aside, and I'll use it the next time I cut. So I just place that aside. My layers shifted just a little bit, so I'm going to go back and refold these. Then I can use a smaller mat because I'm only cutting one concentrated area on this die. So I will place it right over what's being cut. I'll turn it around so that that end goes in first. Need my die adapter. Put it up on the die adapter. Push up to the rollers. Give it a little scoop. And now it goes through. Again, I'm just going to switch this back to the other side so that I can show you how it comes off. Again, I slide my mat off. You can hold down your center pieces and pull up all the scrap from around the edges.
She knows it might be a joke or something. What? Why would it start quarterback?
And now we have 12 half square triangles. Back now, I have all of my units cut, and I'm at the sewing machine, and I'm going to show you how we will piece this block together. Normally with chisels, you will normally sew and make a ½ inch, make a ¼ inch seam using your half square triangles, and you'd sew the block unit this way. But for today, we're actually changing that around a little, and we're going to actually sew our half square triangle onto our chisel like so. So I'm flipping my fabrics right side together, and it's just easier for me to sew from the straight edge down instead of sewing from this way down. So I'm just going to flip that under, and I'm going to run this through the machine at a ¼ inch seam. So I need 4 of those to make one block. And remember, when I fan folded my light fabric, I have to make sure that I have right sides up when I'm sewing. So I am flipping those around. You could stack all of those right side up before you start sewing. That's what I normally do, but I just wanted you to be aware that because we fan folded that fabric, that you do have right and wrong sides up. So this is number 3. And one more. Now normally when I'm making blocks, I chain piece so that I don't break my thread. I can always have another unit started, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm just going to take one of my chisels from my next piece, and I'm going to sew it on. And then I clip right behind that and leave that one unit on the machine. And then I just clip these units apart. Okay. Now, at this point, I just finger press my seams to the side. when I cut my, before I cut my fabrics out, I did use spray starch to press my fabrics with, so they have a little body in them. So the very first pressing that I do, I don't have to go to the ironing surface to press. I can just finger press these units open. So I'm going to slide these out just a little bit. So now I have my units that are pieced like this block I have laid out here. So what I need to do now is when I sew, I'm going to have the long edge down, and then I want to place right sides together the next unit, but I want to have the half square triangle piece section on top. And if you look really close, you can see how very nearly accurate that they are. So when I get to the machine, I will just pull this down a little bit so that it matches perfectly. And I need 2 units exactly the same. So I will sew the second half of the block. And again, I'm going to chain piece on another fabric. So I'm always chaining on some other project or to the next piece of fabric that I need. This one I'll just place aside until I get 4 units. Now this block, at this point, is half of the block unit. And I want to go to the pressing surface now and do some pressing. I just want to show you how I press my blocks open. For this project, because pinwheels are going to be forming, I like to press my seams open to reduce bulk. So I press in place, and you can even press over the other seam that we finger press for to help press that seam flat even more. And then I open this up and I put it on this tool called the strip stick. And then what I do is I get it started. I'll move my hands in a minute. Once I get it open, you can kind of see that it seems kind of flat, and that helps because I put starch in my quilt. So then I take the tip of my iron, just move my finger down, and then it presses the seams open for me. Once that's done, I just lay it back on the ironing board. I don't have to, but I just do a press. I'm not ironing and moving the iron all over the fabric because we are dealing with bias edges here. So we have one more. Show you that again. I put it on the strip stick. I put my finger to lead this iron down so that I can get the point open, and then I just slide down, and that seam gets pressed open. I just take it back to the flat ironing surface, one press, and then I'm done. Good. Okay, we're back at the sewing machine, and we just got through pressing our seam, that center seam open, and we want to lay out our block, and we're basically just going to flip the top half down and sew the pieces together, right sides together. So because I press my seams open, I like to go ahead and line that up. So I just pull it back like 1/4 of an inch and just slide it up along the seam line. And I just take a pin and put the pin in the back side of the seam, so it's to the right instead of in the left or in the middle. That way I can stitch up to the seam connection and then take my pin out. So to start sewing, I just make sure I have my corners lined up. Go to the sewing machine, sew my 1/4 inch seam again. When I get like 1 stitch from that pin, I pull the pin out, line up my ends, and continue to sew down the seam. Again, always keeping chain piecing in mind. I go ahead and get my next 2 pieces I want to sew together. Make sure that they're right size together and sew them down for their 1/4 inch seam. Take my little snippers and clip those off. Again, put this to the side because I'm not working with that. And then we have this block. When I go back to my pressing surface, I would press this flat to set the seams. And then I would, again, press this seam open. And we have additional blocks here that I've already sewn together where you can see that center seam has been pressed open. Okay. So I'm going to set this block aside because what I want to show you now is that we do have these blocks that have real funny looking tips where they're not really pointed because we used a die that the half square triangle unit had cut the points off. So I want to show you that these will still line up perfectly when you sew them together. So I'm going to just pull 2 blocks down, and if I'm sewing these blocks together, I just flip the right sides together. I use 3 pins. I line up my corners. Let me switch this 1/4 turn, sorry. I'll cut that. So I want to take my pin. I want to pin in the corner. Then go to my next corner and pin in that corner. And then in the center, I want to pin so that these 1/4 inch seams overlap. So what I do, which is very difficult for me to show you in a video, is that I put my pin a 1/4 inch down right past the stitching, and then on the inside here, I take my pin and stick it in 1/4 inch away from the top. Then I let it go, and then I line up my units. The pin is sticking out through the back, and then I just go ahead and put that pin into place. So that's how I pin. Now because these are bias edges, I've got a little bit of give. You can see where it's a little raised, but that's okay, because when we go to the pressing surface and press, not iron, then that will lay nice and flat. So again, I'm sewing 1/4 inch seam. When I get to the center pin, I want to go ahead and take that pin out because it's real bulky there in that area. And I want to sew down to the end. And again, take my pin out. Now, I'm just going to leave this one on the sewing machine for right now because I have one here that I've already sewn for you, where I've sewn this section together. It has not been pressed. And then when I do press this open, okay, this is just a close-up of the seam so that you can see how perfectly they match up. This is the end of the actual video tutorial. I'm going to have a tutorial on my website at tquilts.blogspot.com, and it's going to show you the quilt that when I finish the actual pieces, as well as I'm going to show you how to make different color pinwheels to alternate your pinwheel colors on my tutorial. Thank you for stopping by.